In an earlier Scooby video, I posted this bit. Years ago, a local lawyer who owned and lived in one side of a duplex was arrested after he was caught putting hidden cameras in the bedroom and bathroom of the unit next door so he could spy on his tenants doing things. At the end of that same video, I went on to explain that this lawyer had been convicted of voyeurism, but that his 3-year sentence was entirely suspended by the judge. He never saw a day inside a jail cell. What I did not mention was that my state's Supreme Court did take his license to practice law away. For just 6 months. He resumed his legal career not long afterward. Many of us would classify what he did as a sex crime, because it was, making him a sex criminal, because by definition, committing a sex crime would make you a sex criminal. However, looking back at what legal statutes were in place in 1994, which was when this lawyer was arrested, what he did was treated as a mere Class B misdemeanor. There was no law in the books that explicitly covered the act of using a camera to record people without their consent, naked and/or having sex, in the privacy of their own homes. What this attorney did, legally, had the same gravity as climbing a tree to peek into a neighbor's window as they undressed. Interestingly, the law was changed the very next year to not only specifically criminalize using cameras this way, but legislators also raised the severity of that crime from misdemeanor to felony. For those who need this explanation, a misdemeanor is generally considered a low-level crime with minor penalties. In my state, they're ranked backward by letter, with C being the most minor to A being the most major. A felony is a much worse crime to be charged with penalties that are far more severe, and they're ranked backward by number, with 6 being the most minor to 1 being the most major. But at the time of the lawyer's arrest, felonies were still ranked with letters, from D to A. Pocketing a pack of gum at a gas station without paying for it would be a Class C misdemeanor. Punching someone in the face would be a Class A misdemeanor. Stealing $1,000 from your client's payroll would be a Level 6 felony, while premeditated murder would be a Level 1 felony. Thus, after this attorney was convicted for secretly filming his tenants without their consent, nude and having sex, the state decided going forward that this kind of crime was bad enough to raise it 2 full classifications in severity, from Class B misdemeanor to Class D felony. I cannot say for certain that this guy's actions were what convinced my state's government to rethink their sex crime legislation, but it does fit the timing. I had to provide all this backstory for what's about to come. I hope nobody's secretly filming me. My state recently held its primary election. For those who need this explanation, most states have 2 elections. The first one, called a primary, is held in the spring of an election year and is how the 2 principal political parties decide who gets to run in the general election in the fall. That second election determines who actually wins office. Campaign season is filled with advertisements, opinion pieces, debates, etc. It's also not uncommon for unflattering stories about candidates to be released to the public, either by competing candidates or local news agencies. That second source can sometimes be just a hit piece by a media organization with an agenda, or simply the Fourth Estate doing their job. Anyway, in my county, the position for prosecutor is up for grabs, and this time around there were several candidates for the Republican Party nomination. About a week before Election Day, the local paper published an article about one of those contenders, a lawyer who owned her own law firm, having been arrested for crashing her car while drunk a few years ago. Her blood had been tested, and she was found to have twice the legal limit of alcohol in her system. In fact, she probably had more than that at the time of her accident, but she refused to be tested on the scene, and her blood wasn't drawn until later at the hospital. While it's tempting to immediately cancel that candidate's campaign, because who would want someone with such terrible judgment to be in a position of power? Everyone makes mistakes. What really matters is what they do afterward with their lives, if they can prove that they learned from their mistakes. However, they should also be required to pay for their mistakes as well, and more importantly, suffer the same consequences as anyone else convicted of the same offense. As far as I'm concerned, forgiveness can only be given to someone after they suffer the full and fair penalties of their crime. The newspaper article further explained that the attorney had entered into a plea agreement that spared her prison time, and would also allow her arrest to be expunged after a set number of years, provided she didn't get into any more legal trouble. For those who need this explanation, expunging a record essentially means wiping it clean from the books, making it appear as if it never even existed. Depending upon a court's ruling, this can mean sealing the records permanently or simply removing public access to them. This would effectively prevent most people from ever knowing the full truth about the original crime, or even that it existed. And the convicted person would be free to tell any story they wanted, making it a near insurmountable task for anyone to gather enough proof to refute their claims. The thing is, typically in our state, a first-time drunk driving conviction requires the petitioner to wait 5 years before their record gets expunged after a plea agreement. Not that the courts are required to even agree to an expungement in the first place. Our attorney was able to petition the court to expunge her record after only 2 years, conveniently before she ran for office. This is because the special prosecutor who handled her case at the time agreed to this condition. By staggering coincidence, that special prosecutor himself was arrested back in 2009 for drug possession and had his record expunged as well. It sure feels that everyone involved in this video used their connections in the legal community to get special treatment that the rest of us schmucks would never get. The newspaper was careful to stress that, while unusual, the attorney had technically done nothing illegal. When they interviewed her before they published the story, she was clearly angry, but also stressed that she had done nothing illegal. She also implied the paper would be acting inappropriately by publishing a story about her arrest, claiming that expunged records were considered unofficial. She also blamed a deputy prosecutor with an alleged grudge against her for leaking the documents. This whole thing is doubly hilarious to me because back in the early 1990s, a friend of mine who was still in high school was dating this same woman who was in the same grade with him, or maybe a year younger. Her parents hated him, but that did not stop them from seeing each other. I still recall one night being awakened by a phone call from my friend to come to her house and give him a ride home since his car broke down and her parents didn't know he was there. He had secretly climbed into her bedroom through a window so the two of them could do what teenagers do. It should come as no surprise that this lady lawyer's supporters came to her defense on social media, with many blaming the liberal media for picking on the poor Republican. I couldn't help but notice how so many of these posts kept saying that if she was elected prosecutor, she'd make damn sure that all the pedophiles and sex criminals would be put away where they belong. And like most people who would blame the liberal media for picking on the poor Republican, they completely missed the point of the article, which was not that she was necessarily unqualified for the job as prosecutor for her drunk driving conviction, which personally I think should have disqualified her, but rather that she may have inappropriately abused her position in the legal community to walk away with a mere slap on the wrist when it's unlikely her voters could expect the same if she were prosecutor. I felt the urge to wade into the cesspool and stir things up a bit myself. And I thought the best way to do this was to defend the paper by pointing out that it was the hypocrisy of the matter for a tough on-crime candidate to get special treatment when they break the law. I also thought that using the example of that sleazy attorney I began this video talking about would make for a great example of how our state's courts have a bad habit of looking the other way when it comes to punishing lawyers who do bad things. I wanted to make sure of my facts before I posted my argument, so to be safe, I ran a search on the Peeping Tom lawyer first. Sure enough, I quickly found the case log from the state that described his crime, and the extremely light punishment they had doled out for him. I also happened to run across the law firm he is currently working at. It's the drunk driving lady attorney's law firm! I had no idea that was where he ended up! What are the odds? But it does put all those sanctimonious, belligerent, anti-newspaper social media posts defending the lady lawyer as someone who had put sex criminals away in a whole different light, doesn't it? When one of the lawyers she brought in to her own law firm is a sex criminal who was never put away. You can't make this up!